Hi, I'm Larry Dignan with Constellation Insights, and we're going to talk about the 5 things we learned about Q2 earnings. So earnings season's basically done. There's a few stragglers, i.e. NVIDIA and a few others. But there were some common themes across the whole bunch of companies reporting. So here's a few of them. This was the quarter of, hey, it could have been worse. If you look at Intel's earnings, they were not great across the board. Things were down a lot from double digits from a year ago, but people were expecting so much worse. And if you look at something like the PC group, what's interesting there is that basically it tanked from a year ago, but the idea was that things are stabilizing, and all that really means is that it's stopped going down double digits. So this was the quarter of revenue gains and earnings gains that weren't necessarily impressive, but it could have been worse. The second theme to think about is the great upsell. We talked about this last quarter, or last segment actually, but not just generative AI, but software vendors are looking to raise their prices across the board. And in a lot of cases they are, or they're adding new products. But the whole theme here is that they're trying to capture the value they create, or at least some of it. So if you're a customer, this is going to be interesting to watch. I don't think this is playing out just yet. But yeah, there's a round of price increases coming, and your friendly neighborhood vendors likely to be a lot more aggressive in the quarters to come. So anybody with renewals coming up, you can expect vendors are going to want more of your flesh. The other big takeaway here is that a lot of people are feeling better about Amazon. So as we all know, Amazon's basically, 3 businesses roughly, right? It's cloud, it's retail, and increasingly it's advertising, which is kind of cool. But from Amazon, what they did this quarter was they beat estimates well. Again, not, some of these estimates were low. Like for instance, AWS growth was 12% in the second quarter. Analysts were expecting more like 10 to 11, so that looked good. But 2 quarters ago, 12% would have been like Armageddon. But the big theme here is that Andy Jassy, who used to run the AWS cloud business, now CEO of Amazon, really put a narrative around AWS and generative AI and kind of what they're going for. So it's a much more nuanced view, and from a narrative perspective, put AWS in the game. Because if you all recall, Microsoft Azure jumped, head of the mindshare game with generative AI. Then everybody started talking about Google Cloud, and we kind of forgot the biggest vendor out there. So Amazon in the second quarter, I think, accomplished a lot. So that's probably the other big takeaway I had. The other one is Apple. That Apple iPhone 15 better be good, because hardware sales are really kind of meh. They're not great. Their revenue was down 1%, which I think was their second or third quarter of down revenue. The one upside here was services. Services for Amazon just keeps chugging along. And the biggest takeaway, they said, is that they have 1 billion paying subscriptions. And that number is just based on scale is pretty insane. So if you play this out over time, Apple's going to look more like a subscription revenue, recurring revenue kind of play. And the hardware's just there for giggles, and to keep you locked in so you keep paying more subscriptions. And then finally, the one thing to say, the biggest takeaway from the second quarter is enterprise IT spending seems to have stabilized, and a lot of vendors are looking for a better second half. And this was kind of unanimous across multiple vendors and categories. So not only were the software companies saying that and the cloud providers, but they were saying, that CEOs were saying this about PCs, even servers, networking. So while things have stopped cratering, everybody's expecting this gradual improvement in the second half. Will it play out? Remains to be seen, but there's a decent bit of optimism out there, which has also come up in some Constellation research surveys we've done. So CIOs and vendors seem to be a little more optimistic about the second half. So we'll see how that plays out, and we'll be back in the third quarter to talk about what we learned.